Are you working very hard to improve your English speaking? Are you aiming to get a high band score in IELTS, the International English Level Testing System? If that is the case, then to get to the higher band levels, you've got to pass through band level 7. And band level 7 is an aspect that changes the whole testing system to make it a little bit harder for you to move further up the scale. Don't be worried, it's not a big problem. You can achieve it, but you have to be aware of what you have to do to get past this barrier. Once you pass that barrier, it's just a case of improving more and more, all the way up to a band level 9, if that's where you're aiming for. In this video, I'm going to show you and tell you what you need to do to get to the band level you want to achieve. So, please follow on. So, the very first thing I'd like to tell you about are band descriptors. What are band descriptors? Well, let me tell you. When you take the IELTS test, it is very important that your performance in the test is assessed in exactly the same way as all the other thousands of test takers that turn up each year. To ensure this happens, there are a set of guidelines for each section of the test: speaking, writing, listening, and of course reading. These guidelines are called band descriptors, and they inform the examiners exactly what you are needed to display to achieve a given band. The band levels range from 0, that means you didn't turn up, you didn't show at all for the test, up to band 9, which is the highest level of ability. Now, just a quick clarification here. To achieve an overall band 9, and that is the overall result for all the 4 disciplines, is very, very difficult. Albeit you need a very high ability, but you would also need some very good luck in the day. That was all in your favour. And that is why achieving this is less than 1% of test takers. However, test takers who may achieve a band 9, perfect, in one or more of the 4 disciplines is slightly more common. So first tip here is be realistic to yourself on where you set your goals. Achieving a band 7 is a very good achievement by itself. The slight leeway that examiners are given, i.e., for example, if they think you are, say, a good band 7, leaning towards a band 8, but you're not quite there to a full band 8 yet, then they can award you a band 7.5. And this is the case in all levels. It could be a 6.5, you're not quite a 7, or a 5.5. So it applies to all the various band levels, except probably between band 0 and band 1, as I don't see how you can about half attend the test. So when you take the speaking test, there will be just you and one examiner who will also record the test on an MP3 player. This same examiner will conduct the test. They will listen to you, and they will also ultimately assess your performance and give the band score for the speaking test. The examiners will have no bias about how you look, your gender, male or female, or the colour of your skin. In general, they try to put you at ease, to encourage you to relax and perform to the very best of your ability. The speaking test itself, it is very natural, of course, to feel a bit tense as you approach the test. It is essential that you arrive at the test centre early with time to spare. Do not be rushing to get there and worried if you're going to get there in time or not. Give yourself time to get there and make sure you're there early. This will ensure that you're not adding to the stress that you're already feeling. While you're waiting for the test to commence, try to clear your mind. Think about other things. What are your plans for later that day or for the weekend maybe? What odd jobs might you have in front of you? Try to unwind yourself. And then when the test begins, speak clearly and loud enough to be clearly heard. This will also demonstrate your level of confidence, which is going to be very high. Yes? Well, we hope so anyway. So what is the examiner listening for? They have 4 criteria that they have to assess. These are fluency, vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. So now let's go on to discuss these 4 aspects and what you should be considering when you're taking this speaking test. So let's talk about fluency first. What do we actually mean when we say fluency? Fluency refers to the ability to communicate in a language, skill, or subject with ease, smoothness, and without hesitation. So by definition, it is possible to be fluent to various degrees, as stated by the language or skill on a particular subject. The level of fluency expected at various levels in IELTS is clearly defined in the band descriptors. The higher the band level, then the higher the level of fluency that will be required for that particular band level. So don't be disheartened. You can be very fluent at band 5 and you can be very fluent at band 9. It's just that the expectation differs. So I'd like to give you a little example here. If you look at this question, which is a typical IELTS Speaking Part 3 question, what is your favourite type of music and why do you enjoy it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 2 responses. I'm going to give you a band 5 response and I'm going to give you a band 7 response to this particular question. But before I do that, and as an interesting exercise, why don't we just give you a few seconds to read this question, and then I'm going to give you 30 seconds to try and answer this question yourself using a minimum of 3 sentences and see how you get on. So that's what we're going to do. So, how did you do? How was your response to that question? This is the kind of response that you would want the examiner to give if he thought you were a band 7 candidate.
I like pop music, I guess. It's, catchy and easy to listen to. I like the beats and the rhythm. They make me want to dance. The lyrics are also relatable, and sometimes the songs can be quite emotional, which is nice. Yeah, that's why I enjoy pop music. My favorite type of music is classical music. I find the intricate melodies and harmonies of classical compositions truly mesmerizing. The way each instrument contributes to the overall piece fascinates me, and I admire the skill and dedication of the musicians who perform these complex works. Moreover, classical music evokes a sense of elegance and timelessness, which brings a unique sense of tranquility and inspiration to my life.
So, as you can see, there is a huge difference between band 5 and band 7. In fact, it's very difficult even to move from band 6 to band 7. If you're currently in a band 6 and you want to get to Band 7. It takes dedicated effort to get there. Now, before we move on to the next section, I would like to tell you that I teach a lot of IELTS and TOEFL students, and I have some various exercises that help them develop their fluency and vocabulary, etc., very, very quickly. It's my intention to start bringing a lot of these exercises out on video on YouTube. And these are short exercises that only take a few minutes a day. But it requires dedication, because if you do these exercises every day, you're going to find your fluency and your vocabulary, etc., comes very, very quickly and improves immensely. So if you would like to improve your fluency and vocabulary, etc., why not contemplate subscribing to this channel and liking this channel, and maybe even recommending it, sharing it with a few of your other test takers. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about vocabulary. Okay, now we are talking about the vocabulary. Let me start by telling you something that you probably already know. You know, as native English speakers, we do not go around talking to each other with high-level complex vocabulary. We talk in normal tones and we try to speak clearly and use as simple a language as possible. IELTS is no different. I think we complex things by telling people they need to use slightly more complex vocabulary, etc., where actually, in actual fact, we don't want them to use more complex vocabulary or no more than they need to get the band score that they want. So what I am saying to you is keep it simple. As long as you are communicating clearly and everybody understands what you're saying, then your English is pretty good. Now, vocabulary is all about language, and language is all about vocabulary. That's how we get our messages across to each other. But in IELTS, the International English Level Testing System, vocabulary requirements vary across the different bands, obviously, but there is a specific point where it moves into the higher level, and that is at band 7. At band 7, the band descriptors actually look for a few more things than they do in the earlier bands. These being primarily your use of more complex phrases and also using idiomatic expressions. I would also say that the paraphrasing also becomes a little bit more key in demonstrating just how much of a higher level you do have in the English ability. You know, if you're aiming for a band 8 or band 9, or even in between 8.5, then yes, to get to that level, you are going to have to use more complex vocabulary. And if that's a level you are aiming at, then you must have a good reason for doing it, because it's going to take you a lot more effort to get there. And when you're getting up near that level, it is considerably more difficult. I always recommend to my students, aim for a band 7. And then if you get a 7.5 or you get an 8, you're on a bonus. But for sure, using standard vocabulary and speaking clearly, concisely, and everybody can understand you, then a band 7 is easily achievable. And that does more than what's required for the majority of students. Now, just let me talk about paraphrasing for a moment. Many students don't really get to grips with what is required in paraphrasing. And what I would say is that it doesn't have to be long, complex, drawn-out paraphrasing of a large piece of text. It can be a simple, if you're asked a question, it can be a simple rephrasing of that question, paraphrasing it so you're using different words, but you're having the same meaning as the original question. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So here we have a question that's quite typical of IELTS Speaking Part 3. So the question is, how has technology influenced the way people communicate? So, the best way, or no, maybe not the best way, but there is a way that you can answer this by repeating the question, but doing it with a paraphrase. So you rephrase the question into your own words, but making sure that it means exactly the same. Now let's just look at this question again. How has technology influenced the way people communicate? So communicating and technology are the main aspects of that sentence. Now let's look at the possible paraphrased version of it. They could start the beginning, it could be at the beginning of the answer to the question. So paraphrased, the impact of technology on communication methods is quite significant. So that would be a superb paraphrase to answer the question, and it would certainly be well noted by the examiners at an IELTS test. So just to wind up the vocabulary side of things, I'd like to discuss the best way of improving your vocabulary and learning your vocabulary. But first of all, I want to explain something to you about active and passive vocabulary. So what are active and passive vocabularies? Well, your passive vocabulary is a lot of words that you may have learned and you know what they mean, and if you hear people using them, you've got a good idea of what's being said. But you've got very little confidence yourself in using these words because you're not 100% sure of the context, and that will make it difficult for you to use those words. Whereas the active vocabulary is your words that you've learned, you know how to use them in context, you're confident with them, and these are the words that you rely on when you're conversing in English. So when it comes down to learning, if you sit down with a large book of words or a long list of words and start making your way through them and start learning them, there's a good chance that a lot of them will go into your memory, but they'll go into your passive memory, the memory where you've got an idea what they mean, etc., because you've read them and you've studied them, but you've not used them and you've never used them in context. So they're going to fall into your passive vocabulary, which is getting bigger and bigger, and no problem with that, but it's not helping you in your conversation. We want to bring vocabulary into your active vocabulary, words that you're confident you know how to use, you know to put them into context, and that is the words that you've got to try and increase in the passive vocabulary, in the active vocabulary. So just learning a few at a time and learning how to use them is exceptionally important, and I would encourage you not to overdo it. Even for a band 7, you're not needing a whole host of a huge host of vocabulary, but you do need a good amount of vocabulary if you're going to get to a band level 7. So that's it on vocabulary. Let's go on and talk about grammar now, which is the glue that sticks everything together when we're talking and makes it sound sensible to the people that are listening. So on to grammar. Well, as I just said, we're now going to talk about grammar, which is the glue that sticks everything together and makes everything make sense to our listeners. In IELTS, it's absolutely vitally important, if you want to get your good band scores, that you do have the associated grammar to make you sound very proficient at the language. Not only in your speaking, but also in your writing. Grammar brings everything together and makes everything make sense, which is extremely important. The best way of improving your grammar and getting it right is by reading and listening and paying attention to the grammar that's being used. Once again, if you're practicing alone, recording yourself speaking aloud and listening to yourself to see if it sounds the same as what you've been listening to. Also, use it with your writing as you're practicing writing also, because that will let you see how your grammar looks when it's written down also. The best aspect is if you can get involved with people, organizations, groups that are also speaking English or learning English. This is the most effective way using the language and getting feedback on what you're saying and how you're saying it is actually it's essential. So that would be my recommendation. Doing it alone is not terribly easy, I can tell you. Finally, I want to move on to the last element of importance, and it's no less important than any other aspect, and that is pronunciation. Now, I know this is an aspect that troubles a lot of foreign students because they have to start making sounds. They're not, their mouth and their mouth actions are not used to producing these sounds. And it's a case of learning how to do it. But before we start talking about that, let me just talk about accents. You know, many different accents people speak English. Even in the UK, there are many different accents. And then when we take into the rest of the world, American, Australian, New Zealand, South Africa, some places in Africa, many different accents. And accents do not matter, not in the slightest. Nobody is going to pay any attention to your accent as long as you're speaking clearly, concisely, and understand what is being said. That's the important thing. When it comes to IELTS, we look at 4 particular aspects in pronunciation that you've got to concentrate on if you want to do well. We talk about vowel sounds. We talk about consonant sounds. We talk about word stress. And we talk about intonation. All important aspects for you to work on if you're going to do well in the test. So how do you practice for pronunciation? Well, I've just recently put a video up on YouTube that goes through some tongue twisters, and these are very good ways of making your mouth and face create the sounds that you need to create. Peter Piper picked a piece of pickled pepper, for instance. There's a few of these, there's a lot of these little tongue twisters around, and they can be fun too, to try and pronounce. And they certainly make you work hard in getting your muscles and your lips and your tongue, etc., all in the correct positions to make the sounds. Another thing you can do is listen to native speakers and then try to say the same as they're saying at the same time, simultaneously, and see how you work out with that. The next exercise is mimicking. Get some audio clips of native speakers speaking and try to mimic what they're saying and see if you can get the pronunciation, etc., closely. And once again, speaking out loud and recording yourself so you can hear yourself and you can actually make an active comparison about what they're saying and about what you're saying, and do they sound similar? It's a very good way of practicing, and I strongly recommend it. That's probably the one area that a lot of foreign students really have to work hard at, even though they've got all the other things, the vocabulary, the grammar, etc. Getting the pronunciation right is the last key to be speaking clearly and concisely. So good luck with that. Well, there you have it. Now you should be fully aware of what they are looking for when you do the IELTS speaking test. Your next step is really to get to know what they're looking for in the IELTS speaking test itself, the 3 sections, and how you address those 3 sections of the test. That's your next task. If, like most students, you are working to a specific time frame, then to progress as quickly as you can and get to the level that you desire to be at for the test, I suggest you start studying every day. It's important that you don't let it slip. You're going to commit to it. It's your future. You've got your whole future plans on passing this IELTS test. So dedicate yourself every day. I will be producing a video very shortly on how to plan out your studies on a weekly basis and to work to them effectively. I am also producing a series of short videos that gives you not more than a 15 minutes duration practice you speaking and answering questions to help you progress. These are key really to developing you very quickly. My students, I give them when they're learning, practicing for IELTS, they say that this is one of the biggest areas that helps them. And this will be starting to come out in videos as early as the next 2 days. So it'd be worth subscribing and ringing the bell, etc., for this channel so you're aware that when these come online. And the last thing I want to do is just to thank you for watching and wish you the very, very best for IELTS success. See you next video.